Lord Neuberger, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And welcome to Future Leaders. We are so grateful that you are able to join us tonight. Lord Neuberger, you were the president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. Let's just take a second to think about that. You were the president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And what that means is that you were the most senior legal person in this country for the 5 years that you were a judge on the Supreme Court. Is that true?
Yes, it is. I didn't think of that all the time, but yes, I was.
Round of applause for that. And raise your hand if you've met a lord before in person. Raise your hand if you've met a lord before in person. Raise your hand if you've, okay, put your hand out. Raise your hand if you've met a judge before in person. I hope you weren't on the wrong side of the dock. Lovely. Now, I'm going to ask you again, raise your hand if you've met a lord before, and I want all of you to raise your hand because tonight you have met a lord. Raise your hand if you've met a lord. Excellent. And Lord Neuberger is really keen to hear your questions. That's his favorite part of the evening is questions from you. So as we're talking, start thinking about what those questions are. And we've saved 20 minutes at the end just for questions from you. And I think we've got some prizes as well. We've got some pens and some power banks for some really, really impressive questions. So keep those ready for us. All right. So, Lord Neuberger, am I right in that your official title is Baron Neuberger of Abbotsbury? Have I said that correctly?
You have, yes.
And tell us a bit about Abbotsbury. So that's, where is that?
It's about 2.5 hours drive away from London, in near the coast in Dorset. It's a village where we've got a house where now our children can come with our grandchildren. And it's in a village, pretty village, with a swannery at one end of the village and a subtropical garden and a barn at the other end of the village.
Wow. And a swannery. What is a swannery?
A swannery is where they breed and keep swans and feed swans. And it's quite nice for people to come and visit when they're on holiday.
Wow. And is it true that all swans in the United Kingdom belong to the king?
I think they do, yes. I've never actually asked him, but I think they probably... I don't know what he does with them, but anyway.
Hopefully not eat them. And so Lord Neuberger, for someone who was the most senior lawyer, barrister, judge in this country, one would think that you were in love with the legal profession right from those early days. And I'm going to ask you in a second if that was the case. But before I do, raise your hand if you are interested in the legal profession or if you've ever been interested in joining the legal profession, barrister, lawyer, paralegal, and criminal justice system, social worker, therapist, anything like that that might be connected. Wow, that's quite a lot of people, Lord Neuberger. So make sure you mention this talk on your personal statements. And make sure you ask a question so you can say on your personal statements, Lord Neuberger, the president of the Supreme Court and I, ... All right? So, Lord Neuberger, so you must have been wanting to be a lawyer when you were still in your mum's womb.
It's interesting you mentioned my mother because actually I never thought of becoming a lawyer till I was 24. I think with my particular character and abilities that I was actually... It was the right job for me, but I never thought of being a lawyer as a child or even when I was at university. And I think the main reason was that my mother, in whose womb I was, as you say, was not keen on lawyers. She thought lawyers would act for whichever side paid them, and they were, to use her old-fashioned expression, smart Alex. And she didn't, so I never thought of being a lawyer. My father was a scientist. And when I went to university, I decided, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, to study chemistry. I did chemistry, physics, and maths A-level. I went to university and did chemistry. I did a year's research. And halfway through my year's research, I thought, actually, I'm not a very good chemist. And I looked around at the other scientists. They seemed more inspired and more interested. And I thought I've got to find something else to do. So I found something else to do. I went into banking in the City of London. And, well, to put it bluntly, if I was a bad chemist, I was a worse banker. And after 2 years of banking, I thought I didn't really know what to do. And that's when I met a friend who I hadn't seen for some time, who was a lawyer, and we went off and had a drink. And I moaned about what I was doing, and he told me what he was doing. And I just had this moment where I thought, that's what I want to do. And it was just after my 24th birthday.
Wow. At the age of 24. So you really came to the legal profession late. And you mentioned you read chemistry at university. You went to Oxford, didn't you, to read chemistry? So boys and girls, raise your hand if you are interested in applying to Oxbridge. So you've got an Oxford alumni. What college did you attend, sir?
A college called Christ Church.
Oh, wow.
It was a nice college. In those days, in the 1960s, probably before many of your parents were born, let alone before you were born, it was a very privileged place. I mean, the world is still, as you know, favours people from privileged backgrounds, but it was much worse then.
And it's a beautiful college.
It's a lovely college.
We've taken students there, beautiful grounds, a beautiful space, and it must have been incredible to spend 3 years there in that space. And we can talk more about that time. So you read chemistry. So raise your hand if you're taking STEM A-levels like Lord Neuberger. So you took chemistry, physics, and?
Chemistry, physics, and maths, yeah.
Chemistry, physics, and maths. Wow, those are some difficult A-levels.
Yeah, I've just talked to somebody in the audience who's doing more than that. Four A-levels.
Whew, goodness. Lovely.
I had nothing to both.
So is that, let me just check that. Sorry. That's right. No, that's just it. Sometimes it goes off. There we go.
Sorry. Yes.
Lovely. And so you read chemistry because you wanted to. Did you want to be a scientist, or is that something your mum wanted you to do?
To be honest, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I think I was subject to a bit of subconscious pressure from my father, who was a scientist, who quite liked the idea of his son being a scientist. Because I didn't know what to do, I went with the flow.
And what kind of scientist was your father?
He was a biochemist. He did work into proteins and that sort of thing.
Wow. So you're fast forward, you're 24 years old, you're in banking, you're at one of the most prestigious banking firms in the world, and it's not clicking, it doesn't feel right. And I think there's a real lesson in that, isn't there? That when it doesn't feel right, it's never too late to pivot, right? It's never too late to pivot. Don't feel like you're stuck in anything. If it doesn't feel right, and that isn't only about your career, it can also be about your university course or whatever the case might be. If it doesn't feel right, pivot. There's always another option. So you're seeing your lawyer friend. What was it that he said about the law that you think, oh, I'll have some of that?
It's very hard to explain. I think he had a couple of legal problems that he was dealing with, and he talked about them, and I just thought that's the sort of thing I'm interested in, is the sort of issues which I'm interested in. I can't remember what the problems were, but they were legal problems. I'd never come across legal problems before. And I entirely agree with you that one has to be open-minded and brave. Open-minded in the sense that have a go at doing something, and brave in the sense if it doesn't work, move on to something else. And if things don't work out, you shouldn't look back and think I spent 2 years wasting my time. I think although it wasn't obvious that doing chemistry and then working in a bank helped me, I think any experience you have, provided you're doing something worthwhile and working at it and something challenging, is good for you. It helps you make who you are, and any experience which you have in a different field from the one you end up in nonetheless can be very useful, often in a way you don't quite realize. But any experience, provided it involves effort and it involves doing something worthwhile, does in the end end up working for you.
That's such a good point, isn't it? Because when you're young, you think in shorter bursts, don't you? You think even 6 months, if taking a gap year could be a waste of time. If I don't get my first choice and I have to defer a year, that year I'm so behind. But actually, all of the experiences that you have, whether it's traveling, gap year, university apprenticeship, all of that is feeding into whatever your future is going to be. And the more diverse those experiences, the better.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when I finally discovered what I wanted to be at 24, the friends of mine, because I did have other friends who were lawyers, but I hadn't really talked to them about law. I felt they were way ahead of me because they'd started doing law at university at the age of 18, and I needed to come to it at 24. And I felt I was far too late and I would never catch up. And I was lucky I did catch up, overtook many of them.
Well, all of them, Lord Neuberger.
Both all of them.
Yes.
But that's absolutely right. You when you're 24, starting 6 years late seems very, very late. Looking back on it at my age, 6 years isn't very long. Doesn't make that much difference. And I think part of my success was partly due to the fact I had other experiences which most other lawyers and judges didn't have.
And that's a really interesting point. So do you think the reason you were so successful in your field was because actually you brought to the field a more diverse set of experiences?
I think it's quite possible. I mean, I think what you have to face, anyone who's successful doesn't like to admit it, but what you have to accept, and you probably discovered in your lives already, that luck plays a large part. Events that happen that you have no control over, sometimes good, sometimes bad, do have a great effect. And that's partly, my success is partly due to lucky events. The other odd thing about lucky events is that events that sometimes seem rather unfortunate, even disastrous at the time, looking back on it, turn out actually to have been good events and good for you and good for your career, even though at the time they seem disasters. And what you have to do when things go wrong, and things always go wrong from time to time for everybody, is to try and learn lessons and turn it into something positive. Not always possible, but often it is. And as I say, in the long term, things that seem bad often turn out to have been good.
It's such a powerful lesson there. And I love what you said about luck, and absolutely luck has got something to do with it. But what is that saying? Fortune favors the brave.
Fortune favors the brave.
Fortune favors the brave, right? And fortune is another word for luck. So, sometimes we create our own luck as well because we're willing to take that risk. We're willing to do that hard work, right?
And when luck comes your way, be ready for it and grab it.
Exactly that. Be brave, right?
Be brave.
What would you do if you were 10% braver? Ask yourself that every day. What would I do if I was 10% braver today? Who would I speak to? What job would I go to? What question would I ask of future leaders if I was 10% braver today? Be that version of yourself every day. And so, Lord Neuberger, you're 24 years old, not very long ago, and you've decided, you've read chemistry, you're working at a great bank, and you think, no, it's time for a change. So how does that work? Do you go back to uni, or how did that training work?
In those days, you had to do exams. And I did some of the exams I stayed on at the bank and didn't, because I hadn't got that much money, did them in the evening. I needed to be still to earn money. And then I turned myself into a student for a year and did the second lot of exams. You could do it in 2 years in those days. And then I arranged a pupillage, which some of you may know means you become an apprentice to a barrister. It's a training period, a practical training period. These days, it's quite difficult to get a pupillage after you've qualified because you get paid, which is important because it means that it's much more equal. You don't have to have private money to become a pupil. But there are fewer pupillages as a result. But in those days, getting a pupillage was quite easy, but the difficult thing was being taken on in a set of chambers. Chambers are really a group of barristers, and you need to become a member of that particular group. In those days, they were 20 or 25. Now they're much bigger, 100 often. You have to become a member of that group if you want to start work as a barrister. And I actually had to have 4 goes before I finally found a group that would take me. I did 6 months with 3 different groups, at the end of which each of the groups took on a different person from me. So it was a slightly depressing time because having made the move late, I thought, oh God, it's all going to go wrong. And it was an example of things which seemed to be bad turning out to be good, because I tried for very good chambers, very good groups, and didn't get in, and had to accept a much less good group, or what was thought to be a much less good group, much less good chambers. And the work there and the people there just happened to suit me in a way that I really don't think the good chambers would have suited me so well. So that was always what I think of as an example of something that seemed very unfortunate at the time, turning out very well.
Wow, I love that part of your story, Lord Neuberger, because just think about that for a second, right? Lord Neuberger applied for 4 jobs essentially and didn't get it. And it's not just you apply for the job, you go in for your interview, you don't get it. He spent 6 months at each of those offices showing them everything he had. And after the 6 months, they said, no, thank you. Lord Neuberger did it again for 6 months. No, thank you. Again for 6 months. No, thank you. Again for 6 months. Yes, we'll take you. But actually, it's as Lord Neuberger says, perhaps not that top tier of chambers, but the second tier. And why is that important? Because the end of this story, certainly not the end, but where the story led to was Lord Neuberger becoming the most senior judge in the United Kingdom. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. If you don't get that grade in that subject you love, if you don't get into Oxford or your first choice or your second choice, that doesn't mean it's game over. It doesn't mean you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. You're not going to be the best at what you do in the whole kingdom. It's still possible.
Absolutely. I mean, in the end, you've got to remind yourself it's a long distance race. It's not a sprint. And you just got to keep going. One of the most important things is to have what you might call high spirits, have confidence. Of course, you get depressed when things go wrong, but just keep going. And nobody can guarantee things will come out right. But if you've got the right mixture of determination, hard work, intelligence, good personal skills, you should be fine.
And this is why the first session we do with you is growth mindset. The first online session you had was growth mindset. You might be thinking, oh, I've heard about this. Why is Future Leaders making me do this? Because that is exactly that mindset that Lord Neuberger is talking about, right? If you're thinking positive, even in the face of a lack of success, if you remain positive, anything is possible. And we see evidence of that on stage with us tonight. And so, Lord Neuberger, you write the exams. You're now a lawyer. Was the law what you wanted it to be? Did you fall in love with it?
I think I did. I did enjoy myself very much. I mean, one thing which you can't entirely control is whether you've got a sort of happy temperament. And I think I'm very lucky. I'm quite a happy person. So I think that helped. And when I found something that I was quite good at and I enjoyed, I really did get going. I think because I started late and had a slightly uncomfortable start, slow start, I was a bit obsessive, became a bit too obsessed with my work. Years later, my daughter got a hamster, and it used to spend all its time running round and round and round on a wheel. And I sometimes thought that was me working. And I had a terrible warning one day. We came down for breakfast one day, and the hamster had gone round the wheel on the wrong way and had decapitated itself. So I just hope that wasn't a lesson for me.
Yeah. And interesting that you raised that. And I think, with your age and experience and expertise, it really gives you that wisdom to look back. And if you could do it again, would you work less? Should people work less? Sometimes I look back and think I'm working too much and I'm going to regret this.
I think I would ideally have worked less. I mean, still got a very tolerant wife and 3 children who I'm very fond of and get on well with. But looking back on it, I should have spent more time with them than I did, more time helping my wife than I did. She sacrificed her career for mine. That was more common in my generation. But looking at my children and their marriages, it's a more equal world between men and women than it was.
Did and you mentioned that your daughter is a lawyer.
She is. I'm afraid all 3 of my children are lawyers. Should ask me whether I thought any of them would become lawyers when they were even at university, I'd have said no.
Wow.
So it was a bit like me, really. They came to law late. What's worse, my wife, who's not a lawyer, is that all 3 children are married to lawyers.
So you've got 6 lawyers in the family. Round of applause for that. 6 lawyers. Although if I married into the family of the president of the Supreme Court, if I wasn't a lawyer, Lord Neuberger, I'd go train to be a lawyer, and connect there. So none of your children studied law at university, but then converted into law. What did they study?
Jessica studied economics. Nicholas studied history of art. Max studied economics management.
Wow. It's really interesting because we're partnered with a couple of law firms, and some of the questions that students ask them when we take them there are, do you prefer lawyers who have come directly from a law degree, or do you prefer lawyers who studied something else and then do the GDL, which I think is called now something else? And Joanne might know who's studying law. And often the law firms tell us, actually, we prefer the candidate who studied something else because, exactly to your point earlier, it gives you that diversity of experience and knowledge. Do you think that's the case? I'm sure you've done some hiring at your very senior level. What do you look for in lawyers?
Well, I think that when you ask a lawyer, when you say to a lawyer who's been successful, I want to be a lawyer, should I study law at university? All the answer that the lawyer gives will tell you is whether they read law at university. Because normally if they did, they'll say you should read law. And if they didn't, they'll say you shouldn't. And I personally don't think it makes much difference. I think if you read law, it gives you enormous advantage of immersing yourself in law for 3 years and really getting to grips and understanding it intellectually and academically as a subject. But if you don't read law, it means you understand other things and you bring a more diverse mind when you do become a lawyer. You lose a year because you have to do a conversion course, a GDL or whatever. I think my general view would be, if you want to be a lawyer and you're very interested in another subject, history or maths or chemistry, then study that and then become a lawyer. But if you're not particularly interested in anything, or obviously if you're particularly interested in law, then read law. But I don't think it's not a vital question for you to decide if you want to become a lawyer. My impression is that a lot of the law firms, actually, when they're recruiting a lot of people, try and have about half who've studied law and half who haven't.
Excellent. Thank you. That's really useful. So raise your hand if you plan to study law. Raise your hand if you plan to study law. Nice and hard. Don't be shy. Okay, raise your hand again if you plan to study undergrad law and then become a lawyer. And raise your hand if you plan to study another subject and then do the conversion into law. It's quite evenly split, isn't it? And when we go to top firms, they say actually, if they look at their intake of solicitors, half of them have studied law and half of them have studied something else. So well done to those of you that want to study. Well done to all of you, but well done to those of you that know you can study something you love and then come back to the law later. I think that's a real gift, isn't it? Lovely. So Lord Neuberger, as we continue, I think one of the reasons that we were so grateful that you would join us this evening and share your stories, because I think your work on the bench and beyond is so mission aligned with our work at Future Leaders. And as you know, we believe that every young person should have every opportunity. And you've been really vocal about creating social mobility within the justice system and helping create pathways for a wider range of young people to be able to enter the legal profession. We know that I think something like 70% of senior judges and top lawyers perhaps have gone to private school. When you were on the Supreme Court bench, you mentioned earlier that there's 12 judges on the bench, 11 of them men, 11 of them white men, 11 out of the 12 had studied at Oxbridge. And so we know that we need more diverse intake when it comes to the legal profession, but all competitive professions. The same is true in banking. The same is true as journalism. And part of our mission at Future Leaders is to change that and create more opportunity. So I wondered where your passion for social mobility came from. Was there a particular experience that you had where you thought, I need to do something about this?
It came to me rather late, to be honest. As I say, as a barrister, I worked very hard and just put my head down and carried on. Didn't really notice the world around me that much. When I became a judge, I started to notice. I think the thing that maybe brought things home to me was sitting in court, quite often you have cases where one side is represented by a solicitor and a barrister who know how things work, know the law, know the arguments that they should be putting forward. And the other side, for some reason, is a wretched man or woman who hasn't got a lawyer and is having to argue their own case without knowing what's important, how they should put it, even what they should call you as the judge. And initially, as a judge, I was rather impatient with people like that and thought, they were made life difficult and so on. Then after quite a short time, I began to think that I'm doing a job that's meant to be to do with justice and fairness. And it's simply not fair that one person is not got the benefit of legal advice and legal representation. And why was it? And then I realized that legal aid was not by any means perfect. So lots of people who couldn't afford a lawyer, nonetheless, even if they were being sued by somebody who had a lawyer, they couldn't get a lawyer because they couldn't afford it. And I suppose more generally as a judge, you are concerned not only with the law, but with justice and fairness. And I just became more aware of unfairness and quickly realized that although people talked a lot about the unfairness of women being not fairly treated, ethnic minorities not being fairly treated, by far the most unfair area were people who came from less privileged backgrounds. And because I'd come from a pretty privileged background, I suppose I'd rather selfishly not thought about it. But as I say, being concerned with justice and seeing unfairness in the courts brought it home to me.
And I think that's such a vivid place to experience the difference between those that are privileged and those that are not. Because actually in that courtroom, you can see the quality of the legal advice they've been able to see, that the barrister that's representing them, how expensive that service has been compared to those that might be on the receiving end of that and haven't. And remind us, what kind of law were you overseeing as a judge?
I was seeing fairly technical stuff. It was company law, intellectual property like patents and trademarks, bankruptcy, insolvency, property, land cases, and professional negligence, commercial stuff. But quite a lot of commercial stuff involved people who either were not in very big cases or had been successful, but then it had gone wrong and they didn't have much money, so they couldn't afford lawyers. And of course, I'm afraid there are good lawyers and bad lawyers. And so if you haven't got much money but can just about afford a lawyer, sometimes people find themselves not very well represented. It wasn't just not represented, it was not well represented, that again made it unfair.
Of course. And so if you can't afford the right lawyer, you might lose that case, and that might come with some significant financial implications.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you another thing now you mention it, which I realized. I was in the High Court judges. There are about 108 High Court judges, and we're divided into three groups. These are the judges who do big trials. And I was in a group of about 20 chancery judges. And looking round at our judges' meeting, I saw 19 men and one woman, and they were all white. And that also brought home to me that we were not in a very fair world. And I don't think I can say that they were all at private school, but it wouldn't surprise me if they'd all been at private school. And that also made me think in a way that, as I say, as a practicing lawyer, I just put my head down and carried on working. Hadn't thought about. So everything, one suddenly realized you were in this little world, and while I felt I'd done well, I've had my challenges, as I said, I also became aware that I had a very privileged start compared with most people.
Of course. And do you think that, and we talked about this earlier briefly, do you think that if we had a more diverse bench of judges, particularly in criminal law, that might influence decision making? That decision making from judges might be more reflective of a wider range of society if there was more diverse judges that sat on the judging bench?
I'm just not sure about that. And I mean, I don't mean I don't think it would. I just don't know. But whether it would or not, I don't think if it would, then clearly that's another reason for having a more diverse judiciary. But even if it didn't make any difference, I think that it's obvious that we should have a more diverse judiciary that reflects society generally, because the law above all is a profession concerned with fairness, and it's simply unfair that privileged people get advantaged over underprivileged people. Secondly, you want the best people to become lawyers. And if you're fishing, as it were, in a pool from which most fish are excluded, you're excluding a whole lot of the best fish. So you're not getting the best people. So I think and thirdly, when people look at the judges who are trying their cases, if they're all from one small group or relatively small group, it doesn't give people confidence in the law, and it undermines confidence. And those are the three reasons I think that we should have a more diverse judiciary: fairness, quality, and perception. But I also agree with you that quite possibly it will mean more diverse and better decisions.
I love that last point about perception, because it's such an important thing, isn't it? We know, science tells us that actually we are designed to feel more empathy and more understanding for people that look like us or that have been on similar journeys. And our bodies are wired in a way that actually, if you're a different color to me or if you're a different gender to me, my ability to relate to you is more limited, right? And so having a more diverse group of lawyers, one could assume, might lead to more a more diverse range of decisions being made. But I think that perception point is so important, because so often we can get this conflict between people and the law. And actually, if the law reflected those people, there might be opportunity to build some of those bridges.
Yes, and if people felt that the judges represented and understood them, that is very important, because, as we all know, justice isn't just a question of justice being done, it's also being seen to be done. And people, I think, won't have confidence in the law if it's full of white public school men.
And so what are some ways, Lord Neuberger, that you think the justice profession and all competitive industries, banking, medicine, as well, journalism, engineering, etc., how can we support social mobility in some of these industries, and how can we drive this mission forward?
I always think that any problem in a group or in society, we try and deal with laws and regulations. And lawyers tend to like laws and regulations because that's what they're about. But actually, the most important thing and the most difficult thing to deal with, because you can make laws and regulations, is to change the culture and just educate people into realizing it's simply unfair if they choose people they're comfortable with, if some people have, because of their birth or background, have advantages. And I think it's the sort of thing which you're doing, which I must say is admirable. Events like this, visits to organizations, getting people who don't have the opportunity to meet judges, to see how things work, and getting the opportunity for the judges and the people running NATO or whatever to see people from different backgrounds. I think that plays a very important part. And in the end, if you can get a change of culture, that is worth 1,000,000 regulations. But it is a long-term thing, and you are trying to change prejudices which are ingrained in people. And I've seen selection processes and so on, people saying, we really must get a woman, we must really get somebody from a less privileged background, we really must get somebody from a racial minority. And they think that in their conscious, but you can see in their subconscious without realizing it, they're still more comfortable with choosing somebody from their backgrounds. And you need to make people aware of it. So I think it comes down to education and just working at it. And things like laws do help. When you look at the race relations position in this country before the mid-1960s, when there were no laws against racial prejudice, and the what went on was much worse than going on now. So changing the law can help, but changing culture helps even more.
Yeah, and it's a combination of the two, isn't it? And sometimes the law comes first and sometimes culture comes first. But really, you need both. You need both of those to go on the journey, don't you? And so Lord Neuberger, as we come to the end of the interview and soon move over to questions from our amazing young people who will have those questions ready to go. If you were sat in this room, Lord Neuberger, on that side as opposed to this side, if you were speaking to your 17-year-old self, what advice would you have for yourself?
I think I would, first of all, say that if there's something I really think I want to do, just think about it before you do it to make sure you're not being silly or that there isn't something better to do or a better way of doing it. But if you are really keen on doing something, then go for it. Because even if it doesn't work out, you'll never forgive yourself for not having had a go at doing something. Secondly, once you've chosen on some course, you should do your best at doing it. But as you said earlier, a point may come when you think this isn't working, or actually I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Don't be frightened of looking above the parapet and seeing if there's something else which is better, which you'd rather do. As I say, when I changed the law at 24, I thought I was doing something far too late and I would never make a great success of it. But it was fine. One of my children started as a lawyer at 27, came to it later, and he's doing very well. And I really don't think, you may think he's David Neuberger's son, so that's why he's doing well. Don't think it makes that much difference in the modern world. But I think if you come late, it doesn't mean that it's a disadvantage, although you will think it is, because as we've been saying, the other things you've had, the other things you've done will bring you benefits in the job you've moved to. Thirdly, I think be prepared to work hard and be committed if you've got your clients. And although there are no absolutely reliable general rules, make sure you keep a reputation for being honest, particularly in the law, but generally it's quite important that people trust you. And it's very easy to lose a reputation by doing something silly which you realize afterwards you shouldn't have done. But if you get a reputation for not being trustworthy, it's very difficult to get it back, to get your reputation back. And then, I suppose, be lucky. But if things go wrong, just remember that it's inevitable things go wrong from time to time. And life can be quite cruel. Things can go wrong. If one thing goes wrong, quite often another two things go wrong. So you get buffeted more than once. And you've just got to keep going. And as I say, often something that seems to have been pretty horrible at the time turns out actually to be an advantage. I can think of various events in my career where I thought things had gone badly wrong. And, even later on, once I got properly going, and in the end, either I just learned a useful lesson or they actually turned out to have been advantages.
Lord Neuberger, incredibly wise and insightful advice for our young people today. Thank you so much for sharing your hugely powerful story. I think it gives hope to all of us about being able to follow the thing we love and trusting in that it all works out. And I love how humble you are saying it all worked out fine. I would suggest it didn't work out fine. It worked out exceptionally well. So ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Lord Neuberger. Okay, now to our favorite part of the evening, questions. Yes, that's what we like to see. Let's go. So your name, your school, your question, please.
You said earlier that, KJ, Westminster Academy. You said earlier that throughout your career you faced numerous difficulties and what seemed like failures at the time that sort of caused you to become, I guess, in a depressive state. What would you say is the biggest thing that helped you overcome that, whether it be motivation or discipline?
I think it was a combination of what I'd call high spirits, just sort of keeping going and trying to couple with a bit of a sense of humor. If you can find something funny and feel slightly detached from it, say, as if it's somebody else, that helps. And when I was younger, I always had very supportive parents, and I was very lucky with my wife and my family. And if you've always got that to go back to, you've got that to support you, that does make a difference. So I think it's a question of a lucky character, and a lucky home life, and the character being just determination to keep going.
And I love what you said about surrounding yourself with the right people, right? You build your own tribe. Look at your friendship circle. Look who's around you. Are there people that are cheering you on, that are supporting you? Or are there people that are pulling you down? Because if they're people that are pulling you down, they got to go. Bye-bye.
I think that's a very good point. I mentioned earlier that I tried to get into better chambers, and I got into what were thought to be less good chambers. But they were very supportive people that I got on with very well, and that helped too. You're absolutely right.
Good question, sir. Thank you.
This what?
Name is Boo.
My name's Hassan. I rode Dong as well as high school. And my question is, obviously you touched on earlier that people from ethnic minorities, they tend to not be top lawyers. So would you say that there's some sort of systematic racism, and how would you combat it?
I think if you want to be unkind, you could say there is systematic racism. I don't think it's intentional, but it's there, and it's cultural and subconscious. And to be fair to the legal profession, generally, people are trying to do something about it. I think people are trying to actually, if anything, try and ensure they take on people in solicitors' firms and chambers, barristers' chambers, and later on as judges. If they can, they will have a woman or a person from ethnic minority rather than a white man. But you can't slant it too much because that would be unfair to white men. But undoubtedly, white men have had it in their favour for centuries. I think in terms of what's done about it, educating people, training them on to deal with their subconscious biases, and just almost shaming people into not being racist is important. And so far as people who are trying to succeed in the legal profession, just to hang on in there. And all I can say is that things are a long way from perfect now, but they are much better than they were 50 years ago. And I just hope they carry on getting better. But you're right, things are not perfect in that field at the moment.
And part of things continuing to get better is your job.
Yeah.
Right? We've done our job. We're doing our job. Right? And this is what I say to you about what's your social action project going to be? Are you going to advocate for equality and diversity in our society? I'm not joking. We're serious, because you will have the power to make a difference. In 10 years' time, you will be in your professions killing it in positions of authority and influence. Are you going to remember the talks that we had? Are you going to, like Lord Neuberger has, create pathways to diversify and send the ladder back down to others that come after you? Or are you just going to be successful and forget about all the lessons that we've learned on this program?
I think a measure of how things have got better, just thinking about your question. When I became a judge in 1996, and if there was a woman barrister arguing a case, or if there was somebody from an ethnic minority arguing a case, I clicked. I really thought, gosh, yep, this is unusual. Now, not so. So things have got better. But as I say, I don't want to give you the impression there's not a problem. You're right, there is, but it has got better, and I hope it continues to get better. And that's partly your job, but it's the system's job more than anyone else.
Libna from Kensington Aldridge Academy. What would you say has been the biggest impact you've made, and what was, I suppose, the process behind it?
I'm probably the worst person to ask what the biggest impression I've made. I don't know. I suppose what I'm quite proud of was the report I did on entry to the bar, which was trying to improve. It started off with people thinking we have to get more women to the bar to become barristers, more ethnic minorities. And it ended up with women being completely irrelevant because the problem for women was not getting them to become barristers, it was keeping them on and progressing them to the top. Because at the bottom, there were 50% women almost, and at the top, they were about 13%. So entry wasn't the problem. Ethnic minorities were not as much of a problem as we thought, but they were getting less good chambers, less good work. And that's a problem, and it still is. And the biggest problem, which was partly related to ethnic minorities, was background. And that's what we really tried to do something about. And I like to think that that was something I achieved. And then, of course, as a senior judge, I like to think I contributed to the development of the law. But time will tell.
Have you made any decisions that have changed precedent or become precedent?
Yes, I have. But on the whole, they're on technical legal issues. One or two are quite significant. But the law, I've not done much which impinges on social policy as such. Unlike the United States, judges in this country have quite limited political powers. They tend to be more technical legal powers. So we can't decide on who can have abortions or whether anti-abortion law or pro-abortion law is legal or whether people can carry guns. That's decided democratically by Parliament. In the US, it's decided by the courts, which I don't think it's what judges should be doing myself. But we did have a case on assisted suicide, on whether the law on assisted suicide complied with human rights. And that was quite an important case. And now, of course, Parliament is considering whether to change the law in that area.
And for those of you that don't know what precedent means, it means if a new kind of case came in front of Lord Neuberger when he was a judge and Lord Neuberger made a decision, every case that comes after that, until the end of time essentially, will follow the same rule. So in a sense, a new law has been made that when X, Y, Z happens, the decision will be A. And that's what precedent is, for those of you that don't know. I think that's quite an incredible thing, that your legacy will be essentially precedent laws you have made that will be followed for hundreds of years to come.
Unless another senior judge decides to make another precedent which is inconsistent, or unless Parliament changes the law. But you're right, yes, it is. And it's quite interesting. Our law, unlike the law in Europe, in France, Germany, Italy, the judges do make the law to a limited extent, not on big issues, public issues like guns and abortion, but we do make the law on the law of contract, the law of negligence, and various other areas of law. You're right.
Thank you, sir. Next question, sir.
My name's Mammy from William Morris Sixth Form, and my question is, with your strong background in company law and intellectual property, I know a lot of the cases are settled through alternative dispute resolution, and my question was, what is your favourite ADR method, and what is the technique you use to settle with the other side when they're being difficult?
It's a very good question. You're very well informed. When I became a judge, alternative dispute resolution was not the expression I recognized. And in the past 30 years, it's become very popular to try and get people to sort out their claims rather than go to court and argue about them. And the most familiar sort of alternative dispute resolution which I've done a bit of, is mediation, which is getting the two parties together with their lawyers and trying to persuade them and encourage them to settle their case. And the big one, which I've been involved with, related to the claims by a very large number of people in tragic circumstances, relating to, I'm sure you've heard about Grenfell Tower, and that terrible fire where 72 people died. It led to a lot of claims against the local authority, against the fire brigade, and above all against the people who were responsible for the cladding on the building and the fire precaution works, which resulted in all these deaths. And a lot of people made claims against various defendants, various people who they said were liable. And I've been mediating together with another mediator those claims. And the technique is to get people to talk, to get people who often are convinced that they're right or have entrenched views, to get them to see that there is another point of view, to see that if they go to court, the lawyers will make a lot of money, but in the end it's more sensible to settle the case if they can. And just encouraging them to settle. And I've done a number of cases like that, which if people do settle their case and agree terms and don't go to court, it's a good feeling.
Absolutely. Are you studying A-level law, young lady? We took. Nice. Well done. Well done. Love that terminology use. Next question, sir. Sir, are you going to come to any of the other sections here? Oh, I see. Okay, I'll come to you guys.
Thank you, Lord Neuberger, for the speech. It was very inspirational. My name's Amun, and I go Nishcom School, West London. And my question would be, what's your advice to the next generation of not just lawyers, but just social justice fighters to fighting social justice within not only the legal section, but society as a whole?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that law is a section of society. There are all sorts of injustices which can be dealt with politically or socially and not just legally. And I think that your generation has a difficult but very interesting time ahead, because the sort of familiar issues which have existed for centuries and have become particularly acute now have been added to by concerns about environment, concerns about artificial intelligence and so on. But the issues, the inequalities and unfairnesses and injustices are forever with us. And you can't do better than fight against them and try and make them better. And it isn't just through the law, you're right. The law is what I know about, but there are other very valuable assets. And I mean, the sort of organization that you're running is a fantastic makes a fantastic contribution to injustice, social injustice.
Thank you, sir. Next question. Let's do some questions up here. Did anyone have a question? Yes, miss. Oh, sorry, I'll start with miss. I'll hold the mic. Go ahead. Name, school?
My name is Selwa and I go to Kensington Aldridge Academy. And I wanted to ask, is there any moment in your career where you decided maybe I don't want to do this anymore, or maybe it's too stressful, and how did you overcome these challenges if you faced any?
I think as a barrister who advised clients on cases and went to court and argued them, sometimes you told the client that he or she was going to win the case, and you went to court and you lost quite badly. And that happens to the best lawyers from time to time. And once or twice I really had a bad experience and thought, I got this totally wrong. I'm not fit to be advising people. And you go through a period of serious doubt as to whether you should be continuing. And then I think that happens to most lawyers. I think I was rather unusual as a judge, that I did once or twice think, after I'd decided a case and given my decision, that I'd got it wrong. And on 2 occasions as a judge, I was actually quite upset at what I'd done and wondered if I should be continuing. What kept me going was the thought that we all make mistakes, that in a way I should be pleased with myself for having recognized that I make mistakes, because we all do, however good a judge or lawyer or whatever other job you do, you'll always make a mistake. And you just got to carry on and do your best. But having determination and high spirits, and as I say, as you said, a group round you, other judges, other lawyers to support you, and a family to support you, that really makes a difference.
Thank you, sir. Next question.
My name is Samaya and I go Paris St. John's Wood. What do you think, what's one thing that you think most people nowadays misunderstand about the law and the role of judges?
I think the thing that most gets misunderstood is that judges have to apply the law. As you said, sometimes, particularly if you're on the top court, you can change the law. Not always. You can't change the law if Parliament said what the law is in an act of Parliament. That is the law, and the judges can't change it. But I think that normally, particularly a trial judge sentencing somebody to prison, or a jury finding somebody guilty or not guilty, or a judge saying that somebody is responsible for an accident, sometimes the decisions seem unfair in public. Sometimes that is because the journalists who've reported it have either intentionally or unintentionally not described the case properly. And you simply think the judge has got it wrong. And in fact, if you knew all the facts, you'd think, actually, no, the journalist has it wrong. But quite often the journalist has got it right. And the judge has reached a decision that the judge didn't like reaching, but the judge had to decide the case according to the law. And the law sometimes produces unfair results because the law isn't purely about fairness. It's also about certainty, so that you have to know what your position is as a person in your private life or in your business. And if you have to know what the law is, the law has to be clear. And if the law has clear rules, those rules will sometimes produce, in a particular case on particular facts, a result that seems unfair. So I, not that often, but not that unoften, found myself deciding a case in a way I didn't like, that seemed to be the bad guy won and the good woman lost, for example. But that was the law, and I had to apply the law. And anyone knowing of the facts would think it was an unfair result. But it was the right result in law.
Indeed. As a judge, you're a referee. You're applying the rules of the game. You can't make up the rules. Your job is to apply the rules in a fair way. So it must be incredibly frustrating sometimes to have to apply the law, but also, not necessarily always think that was the right outcome.
I mean, in a football, let's make a good example. In a football game, somebody might be offside by a few centimetres, and the goal scored might have been brilliant. But because someone was offside, even though it made no difference, the goal's not allowed. And it's a bit like that.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Lee from the Greco Hospital. After a quick Wikipedia search, I found out that you did work in Hong Kong as a judge. How do you say that experience has shaped you and how you go about handling law?
Sitting in Hong Kong until 2020, when the Chinese sort of moved in, was a great pleasure, because up till then I'd only sat as a judge in England, and sitting somewhere else where they had the same sort of law but different people in a different place was very interesting and rewarding. And also, because as a judge I'd stuck in this country, it was simply nice to be travelling somewhere else different. It got much more sticky since the Chinese moved in, and they've had some fairly repressive law, national security law. Fortunately, as an external judge, I don't have to deal with cases involving those laws. But I have come in for some criticism for continuing to sit in Hong Kong. I understand the criticism, but the judges there are good judges. They are left alone by the government, as they are in this country, and they are doing their best to apply the law that we gave them before we gave up Hong Kong to the Chinese, because they've still effectively got English law there. And I feel I should be supporting them, not undermining them.
Absolutely. Thank you. And wonderful to hear that the legal profession also provides opportunity for travel, and that, there are other places in the world that follow English law. I grew up in Canada, and we still follow much of English law in Canada. And so actually, I know many of you want to travel. So training as a legal professional will allow you that facility to travel as well. Okay, let's do a couple more questions. Hands up. Can I take one up here, sir? Okay, sir. I'll hold it.
Hi, I'm Noam from Twyford. I just wanted to ask, what's the longest lasting issue that you faced in your career, and how important do you think sacrifice is, both on a personal and practical measure?
I suppose the thing that when I retired, because the retirement age for judges was 70, it's now 75, but when I reached 70, it was 70. The thing I was most worried about was not having anything to do, because I'd been a bit of a one-trick pony, working very hard at the law. Wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with myself. But I do some mediation that I described, from ADR, as you rightly call it. And I also do quite a lot of arbitration, which involves quite a lot of cases don't go to court. The parties agree that they will have a court hearing in private with a sort of private judge, and all do it all in private. That's arbitration. And I do quite a lot of that. And I also still give a bit of legal advice to people who are thinking of going to court. So that's the other side of the coin. What's my wife's biggest worry, I think, is that I'm working too hard. And I suppose half of me fears that either when you get to my age, you worry whether your mind or your body will go first. But whichever does, I'll have to stop work one day. And I'm slightly frightened about that. But all good things come to an end, one has to accept.
Well, based on tonight, Lord Neuberger, both the mind and body are in fit form. So many years to come still. We'll do one more question. Lots of questions. Thank you so much, guys, for all your lovely questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them, but it's so great to see. If you email those questions over, we can always send them to Lord Neuberger.
I will happily answer any questions you send me.
Lovely. So do send them to our team and we'll get those sent over, all right? Final question?
Hi, my name is Martina and I go to Westminster Academy. You talk about having made decisions you didn't necessarily agree with. It must be hard to separate your own personal opinion with your professional one. How was the realization that the law isn't always fair, and how did you learn to separate your own personal opinion to your professional one?
Oh, good question. Good last question.
I think the advantage of our system is that before you become a judge, all our judges, before they became judges, were practicing lawyers. They were solicitors acting for clients or barristers acting for clients. And life being what it is, I think it's why my mother didn't approve of lawyers, going right back to the beginning. Life being what it is, you often have clients you don't like, or clients you think are wrong, or clients you think should lose. And yet your job as a lawyer is to do your best for them. Within honesty, you can't, if the client says in a criminal case, look, please get me off, I actually did it, but can we tell the court I didn't? As a lawyer, you can't do that. You have to be honest. You might say to your client, look, before we start, don't tell me whether you did it or not, because once you tell me you did it, I can't then say to the court you didn't. But so there are sort of games you can play, which some people might think are a bit questionable, but I think they're within the rules and quite acceptable. But you do get used to acting for people you don't terribly like. You do get used to acting for people you don't approve of, you feel should lose, but you've got to do your best for them. And in that sense, the practice of law can be said to be not very moral. I don't think that criticism is fair. You have to see yourself as a lawyer as being part of the system. Because the law is complicated and legal procedures difficult, any ordinary non-lawyer who's not experienced is entitled to legal advice as to how best to present their case and how best to argue their case. And that's your job as a lawyer. So I don't think there's anything actually wrong with it. But it means that when you become a judge, you've had 20 or 30 years of that, so you know the rules. But even then, I have to say, there have been cases where I have felt that because of a technical failure to comply with let's say there's an agreement, A agrees with B to sell land to B, take a pretty non-moral case. And it's a very good deal for B who bought it because the value of the land's gone up. But actually, the contract, which has to comply with certain rules laid down by Parliament, doesn't comply with the rules, so A can wriggle out of it. Well, as a judge, you have to apply the rules, and you may not like it, it may seem unfair, but that's what you've got to do. I think the cases which I most regret are the ones, and there are two I can think of, where I thought I was applying the law, although it produced an unfair result. And looking back on it, I could have been a bit cleverer with the law and produced the right result. But you mustn't let, and that's another bit of advice, you will make mistakes. Whatever job you end up doing, you mustn't let them eat away at you. You just have to acknowledge them, learn from them, and realize everyone makes mistakes.
Thank you, Lord Neuberger, and great question. And everyone that asked the question today will receive a feature leader's pen, which Mr. Kavian Poor is going to have with him for the second session. So do get those pens from him. Lord Neuberger, we are so grateful that you would give up your evening tonight to come and share your incredible wisdom and insight with our amazing young people. Thank you so much for your time. We hope to continue our collaboration with you. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Lord Neuberger.